if everybody who's like at the bottom and feels like they have nothing going for them, if I look back on the instances that were the most painful in my life, every single one of them, without fail, has created
the life you want is on the other side of a few hard conversations, and you're living a life you hate because you're too afraid to have them.
I think about that a lot, because like whenever I feel anxious or insecure or angry or sad, I'm like, what conversation do I need to have that I'm not having? And so then, and usually if I just think for not that long, I'm like, this is the conversation I've been putting off. And then, you know, I'm not the poster child of mental health. And so I'll just call myself a pansy for not having the conversation. And then I just have it. And so again, I think it's like, I need to have this conversation, and the time between when I have it versus, or when I know I need to have it, when I actually have it, just continues to compress. And if you've ever had like a breakup or a employee firing, or a quitting if you're an employee, like these things that you dread, I don't know if you notice it, but like the day you do it, the moment after you do it, I'm like, how many other conversations can I have? Like, I want to be like, I'm like, who else do I need to talk to? Yeah, totally. Because
become a serial killer for awkward conversations.
So like the next series of hard conversations that I had after I left home was actually like years later. So I had multiple partners I had a partner in one of my gyms. I had a partner in 4 other gyms. I had a partner in a chiro and dental marketing agency, and all of them relied on me to make money. And so all of their livelihoods were still dependent on me, but I was splitting everything, and it was horrible for me at the time. And so I remember when I ended up getting in a DUI, and you know, I talked to a performance coach or whatever, and he was like, your stress and these conversations could literally kill you. He's like, they almost did. So I got in a head-on collision at 60 miles an hour and I walked away, no injuries. But it was like my wake-up call, but not to stop drinking. It was my wake-up call that I needed to have these conversations. And that's what I was avoiding when I was drinking. It wasn't the alcohol. It was what were the things that I'm avoiding, that I'm using alcohol to get away from. And so the next day, I had the first conversation with the first partner, and it was horrible. But the moment I was done, I was like, I got to call the other guy. And I called the other one. I was like, this is how it is. And the thing is I had this backstop of my death, of like, you almost just died because you wouldn't have this conversation. And so then it just gave me this courage to just be like, and whatever the reaction was, I was like, I'd rather be alive. Like, that was it. And so it's weird though, because death has been this really recurring theme in my life, that like the same thing happened when like the only thing that gave me enough balls to stand up to my dad, to be fair, from a distance from the car when I was driving halfway across the country. Like, let's not make me into too big of a hero here. Was the idea that like I started thinking like every day, I was like, I hope I don't wake up. You know what I mean? And that was the thing where I was like, this is a big enough problem that like, if you don't want to wake up, then
what have you got to lose?
Exactly. And that was it. And I was like, I have nothing to lose. And that was when I think in the last podcast we talked about this, where it's like, if everybody who's like at the bottom and feels like they have nothing going for them, reframe that as, I have nothing going for me, which also means that I have nothing to lose by taking action, it makes you a much more dangerous person. And I think that was the flip that I've had repeatedly shown to me in my life that allowed me to take the step that I was afraid to take.
Have I told you about the region beta paradox? Have you seen that one? Okay, so this is interesting. So imagine that you had to go a mile or less, and if you did...
A mile?
A mile.
Okay.
If you had to travel a mile or less, you would walk it. And if you had to go more than a mile, you would drive it.
Okay.
So paradoxically, you would go 2 miles quicker than you would go 1 mile.
Uh-huh.
If you follow that rule, the important insight here is that if you only take action when things cross a certain threshold of badness, sometimes better things can feel worse than worse things.
Oh, yeah.
So if you look around and you see that people are stuck in region beta, this zone of comfortable complacency, right? It's the guy that sticks in his just okay job because his boss isn't too much of it, but the pay isn't that good and he's not really that passionate, but it's all right, whatever. The person that stays in the acceptable relationship, they're not that fired up, but they're not really in love and their partner's not really got much alignment with their interests. Or the person that stays in a crappy apartment and there's a bit of mold in the ceiling, but it's cheap and it's in a good area of town or whatever. All of these people would be better off if their situations were worse.
Yeah.
Because it would give them the activation energy to kick them out of the bottom, and their only regret would be not doing it sooner.
Dude, I love that. So it's funny because if I look back on the instances that were the most painful in my life, every single one of them, without fail, has created a disproportionate gain, right? Like the most painful thing early on was for me was quitting my job and leaving my dad, basically. And then that created my first business and the gyms and all of that stuff. Getting into the DUI, the head-on collision, and like that whole situation got me out of all of these failed partnerships that I wasn't willing to do. But in the moment, I was like, I'm such a failure. Like I suck at everything. But that gave me the springboard. When I lost everything the first time after that, that then gave me like the idea that I needed to change the business model around, right? And that's what switched me into the licensing model. Right. And so like each of these times, and then that became, the first real fortune.
This is kind of like alchemy.
Yeah.
Like turning something which is worse than useless into something that's as precious and useful as possible.
I'm sure the parable of the man and his son, and he like buys the son a horse and then it falls and he breaks the leg, and then they're like, oh, it's so sad. And then the army comes, then his son doesn't die. And then it's like, oh, it's how great. Right. And so it's one of those really interesting ones where like whatever negative situation, and this is probably good for the audience, but like if you think back to all the negative situations you had, like the really, really bad ones, when you expand the time horizon, most times they become net wins. And so then it just means that like, if you're in a really tough time right now, you just got to wait. and then you'll get your reference point back on all the things that changed as a result, because most times when it is bad, it can't get worse. So then you feel like, well, it can't get worse than this. And then your action threshold decreases and you do all the things you should have done anyways. And so it's like, we have this big stack of should do's and we just wait until it's 2 miles.
Yep.
And then I'm getting
in the car.
Like the firing conversation. And you're like, well, I just fired one person, or like I just ended one partnership, I just broke up with one girl, or whatever it is. And you're like, who else do I need to talk to today? Right? Like, and then in like a period, like you have these rapid periods of growth that happen, and then you have the next web of comfort because it's way better than you were before.
Yep.
And I think I wonder, this is more just like an open thought, but like, I wonder how long like more successful people stay in that next plateau. Like I wonder if their threshold for
action stays low.
Yeah, I'm getting comfortable, like how quickly they get comfortable into like, I need to change, I need to get better.